Okay, fantastic. I think we are good to roll. So hello everyone and welcome to a special live broadcast. I'm Nick 𝘼𝙪𝙨, host of Tell Me What to Read, which is Booktopia's podcast. And I'd like to first of all begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are gathering today. And I pay my respect to all elders past and present, and also extend that to any any First Nations people watching this afternoon. So currently we are in the middle of recording during Booktoberfest, which is Booktopia's annual festival celebrating the best of new and upcoming titles. And one of the biggest titles we get to talk about from this year comes from one of Australia's leaders in conservation, the one and only Tim Faulkner, who is here to discuss his book, 𝘼𝙧𝙠. Tim, welcome, mate.
G'day, mate. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Feel free to show your support. Let us know if you've ordered Tim's new book, 𝘼𝙧𝙠, in the comments. If you haven't, you can get a copy right now from booktopia.com.au via the link in the bio. Signed copies are still available at the time of us recording this, so be sure to drop that in. And lastly, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Tim, drop them in the comments. Let us know, and we can include them in our Q&A segment at the end of the show. And I'd first of all like to talk about this koala in the room here. Who is this gorgeous koala that is joining you?
This is little Eddie, and I couldn't turn up solo. So I've got a few guests that are probably nice, as much as we talk about a book, just to talk about them at the same time. And I'll have Eddie here for a minute, and then I'll move on to something else. But little one-year-old koala, and a major focal point of the book is Australia's unique wildlife. And you look at koalas, they're the only species that are solely dependent on eucalyptus. They live right along the east coast of Australia, undoubtedly one of our most iconic species, but just beautiful. And a major part of my life has been working with far lesser iconic species, bandicoots and potoroos and bedongs and wallabies and rock wallabies and frogs and turtles, but all walks of wildlife.
I absolutely love it. And you've achieved so much with this, in the world of animal awareness, head of conservation at the Australian Reptile Park, CEO of 𝘼𝙧𝙠. Where did this journey begin for you?
Oh, look, I'm a kid born in Western Sydney, and I now reside on the Central Coast near the Reptile Park. But, I had a very normal childhood, a great family, and the interest was always there. I spent a lot of time in the bush as a kid, but I reiterate, I didn't grow up in the bush. I grew up in Western Sydney. But I had a family that loved Australia very much, and I was exposed to it. And jumping there, one of the things I'm a major advocate for is kids getting out in the bush, getting their hands dirty, because how else are they meant to develop that connection or an affinity with, and who's going to want to protect it? It was really as simple as that for me. I spent a lot of time and exposed to wonderful Australia as a kid, and I grew up to love it and want to protect it.
I absolutely love it. And I love the education work that you've done in this space. So, you've been working on this for years. People often, may look at this book and see, who's this character? If they're not familiar with you, out of curiosity, why a book now?
Yeah, and you're spot on. I'm 40 on the nose, and I've worked my entire life. I've had two jobs, both in wildlife organisations, and I've built 𝘼𝙧𝙠 as a not-for-profit conservation organisation from the ground up to now one of New South Wales, if not Australia's largest private conservation organisations. And I'm a businessman, realistically, and I like results and I like outcomes. And if you look at Australia, our results aren't good. We've got the worst mammal extinction rate on Earth. We've got the second highest loss of biodiversity next only to Indonesia. They're not good, and we're asleep at the wheel. And so I say about being a businessman, I like results, and those results are to improve things for Australia's wildlife, to stop extinction, to increase a population, or change the trajectory of extinction to, a different status. And they're the real results. However, throughout my 25 odd years, I've been lucky enough to talk with millions of people, and especially kids. And I'm a big believer, if I can get the kids, well, by default, I got mum and dad and the grandparents, And so in that capacity, I don't believe in doom and gloom messaging, because it doesn't work. Ask any school teacher. It's fun facts. And in that regard, I've spent a lifetime educating others. I was approached about a book, and I was nervous, I got to tell you, because I'm not a doctor. I'm not an academic. I've been at the coalface my entire life, and I'm prouder now of that and an acceptance of it. but I felt a little exposed or a little vulnerable because I'm normally sitting there talking about something like this or a cause, you know, or a project. And then it comes to talking about me. But the exciting opportunity was that, you know, my dream would be that everyone in Australia reads the book. You know, you're supporting wildlife at the same time simply by doing that. But in my dreams, it's that everyone that does it, I know I got him. I got him. You know, wildlife got him, and they get it, and they understand it. And that's, you know, how else could I have so many people's attention for such a long period of time to really share those stories? And so that part of, you know, every Australian reading it, and importantly, I mean, the book's written for adults, but it's really easy to share with kids, right? And so that's my dream. And the real opportunity there, as I saw it, was to have an incredible amount of dialect with people that would otherwise be impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely achieved that with this fantastic book. Let's dive into the book. Let's talk about the actual book itself, because you cover a lot of ground. You touch on your own experiences, what brought you to this point, first and foremost. I love the personal story that kind of comes through this book. And you have a good crack at really trying to examine so many of the challenges that Aussie animals face. And I imagine it would have just been extremely hard to compress that all down into one book. What were some of the challenges that, you know, you faced when you were writing this book?
One of the greatest challenges is positivity. I said that before, that you know, I don't believe in doom and gloom. And, you know, I touched on a couple of points earlier. The state of Australia, it's not good, but it doesn't do anyone favors continually banging on that drum. And, you know, so staying positive and being focused on results and outcomes. You know, we've got so many human problems in the world. We've got climate problems, and it seems that biodiversity, we're just starting to wake up to it. And, you know, in its simplest sense, biodiversity, just think of it like a puzzle. It's all the different living things in any one area. In the case of Australia, that puzzle used to be perfect, and then we came and we took some bits out. We put wrong bits in, like fox and cat and dogs and bears, and, you know, all these bits and pieces that have really upset and are threatening our wildlife. So positivity is hard. I'm a great realist, and I guess with that comes an acceptance of the way things are. But you just want to grab people and, you know, don't you know how bad it is? But that doesn't work. So really, it's a challenge to just be proactive and achieve things, you know?
Absolutely. So you're often talking about a lot of the particular species in this, you know, in this book. And as mentioned, you talk about that you've got obviously got a beautiful koala there, but you've dealt with a lot of other animals that across your entire life, and you touch about a lot on this in the book. What are some of the challenges? Give us some examples of, you know, some of those animals that might not necessarily be at the forefront of our mindset.
A really key topic, and a really interesting topic to me for a whole number of reasons. And I've spent a major part of the book going over these parts, which essentially are to get people to recognize and love life more for what it is. Now, things include, we don't have pandas or rhinos or giraffes or orangutans, the big sexy things. You know, we've got cute little koalas, but so much of our wildlife is far less sexy than those big ticket items, but it's just as important. And so the way in which I try to get people to understand that is through storytelling. And the book, again, has enabled that massively. A part of it is how incredibly unique Australia is, and people understanding that and understanding what our issues are. So if you go back 10, 12,000 years before the last ice age, you could hypothetically walk from South America to South Africa, right? The whole way. It was all connected. And so were its wildlife. But this big island of ours was isolated for all of history. And its wildlife represents that. So when you get up to New Guinea, West Papua, Northern Australia, and let's say you've got a rock and you throw it across the pond, a big throw. When it lands in Indonesia or Borneo, Malaysia, somewhere like this, when it hits the ground, it's going to find cats, dogs, bears, primates, rodents, all these things that are placental mammals. And placental mammals typically have really big brains, highly intelligent, perhaps because of that worldly connectivity over time. And there's always been the sharing of information. But Australia's been isolated. So you think over there, you know, dogs, cats, bears, primates, horse, ungulates, hoofstock, things like that, come to Australia, and we've got kangaroos that live in trees and more reptiles than any continent on Earth, and egg-laying monotremes like platypus, you know, and we've got this incredibly unique wildlife. But when Europeans came to Australia, we've brought placental mammals. And so you've got this monstrous country, Australia, and even its most rugged and remote and wild areas are still invaded by feral pests. And of all of our extinctions, I mean, 1/3 of Australia's wildlife is threatened today. 1/3. Overwhelmingly, it's the feral fox and the feral cat, because our wildlife has never evolved with them. It doesn't know how to protect themselves against it. And sure, we've got pollution and climate change and urban sprawl and all these other bits and pieces, but it's like with mammals, 90% of Australian extinctions are because of the fox and cat. And just getting and helping people to understand that we're not like other countries. And a set and forget mentality in Australia, meaning, well, there's a national park, great, just leave it there and it'll be fine, doesn't work. It needs management. You've got to manage the ferals, feral pests, both in the form of fauna and flora, and all these other aspects. And so, you know, that is a real challenge, because we're competing with global animals. We're competing with animals that are less sexy, and we're competing with a problem that is really difficult to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're talking about this and these particular animals, because you say, like, you know, we think of species, or we think of those international species like, you know, elephants, orangutans, humpback whales. I was reading, like, right at the start of the book, you hit us with the comparison of Aussie animals, and there's only 2,000 Australian sea lions left. There's only 14,000 Tasmanian devils left. And of course, koalas are in a vulnerable state now too. I want to ask you a bit more about that complacency that kind of sits in Australia, like probably sits in the Australian psyche, if I can. Whenever you are kind of working with Aussie Ark or at the Reptile Park, what is the reaction that people often get when you tell them these facts about the struggles that our native animals face?
Well, I mean, Australians in particular, we love our wildlife. We see it as a national treasure, a part of our identity. We're just innocently naive to its fate. And a large part of that is, I mean, they don't have a voice, you know, and when you look at an endangered bandicoot, it kind of doesn't matter what you say. People see it and it looks like a rat, you know, and that's really challenging. However, you know, people, as I say, it's quite innocent that we're naive to the fate of Australia. We don't like bad news, you know, and so we switch off to that. But people are overwhelmingly interested. They just need that vessel. And, you know, for me as well, we talk about conservation organisation and the Australian Reptile Park, one of Australia's earliest or first independent zoological organisations. And it's the same. We don't have lions and tigers and bears. We work with natives because that's our point of connectedness. We believe that if children don't touch, feel and smell a koala in some capacity, that what's the difference between it and a Tyrannosaurus Rex then? They're on a screen. And it's not so easy to just go out in the wild and see one. And it's like most kids aren't going to go to the Great Plains of Africa. Most kids aren't going to go to the Komodo Islands. And so if they don't have some point of connectedness to our wildlife, why? I mean, but the wonderful Mr. Attenborough has that line that people tend not to care for what they don't understand. And, you know, so I'm a really big driver of that. I'm just going to move little Eddie here. And I've got some helpers because we all love and know our koalas, but these are some of my favorites. Additionally, my favorite species, and they are Tasmanian Devils.
They're so beautiful.
They're extraordinary. And, you know, with devils, I just tell you a little bit about these for a minute. I mean, we've spent 20 years working to prevent the extinction of the Tassie devil, a big collaborative effort. People, I just mentioned a minute ago, when people haven't met something, they can't understand it. And when they see devils, you might have seen the odd zoo devil that, is aggressive, or we've all seen Warner Brothers, Looney Tunes devil. And devils by nature are actually shy, quiet, timid. But in captivity, they lose their fear of humans. They turn quite aggressive. And, those howls and snarls and that behavior we see in the wild, well, that's just social interaction. And so devils themselves are really calm species like this. Now, these two are being hand-reared. We have 150 devils. We've bred roughly 500, a bunch back to Tassie. We sit there to protect against extinction in the wild. And every year there are a few that where we have to jump in and help mum and hand-rear them. But they're the best for people to meet and engage with and understand what a devil is. Now, in 1996, they were found with a disease called devil facial tumor disease. It was obliterating their population. By 2003, Australia's in panic. 2006, the first devils turn up to create an insurance population on mainland, away from the disease landscape in Tassie, and we're insuring against extinction. Now, fast forward to today, and you've lost 80, 90% of all devils. They're clinging on in the wild. They're battling, and they're still, extinction's not imminent. In 2015, we thought they were gone. That's what we were told, but they're clinging on, but the numbers are precariously low, and they're battling the disease, but also with phenomenally low numbers. Now you're battling car strike, dog attacks, poisoning, and other effects. So we're in that for the long haul. But one of the things I credit devils with, and, as a great example, think about the feral fox that's been introduced to Australia and is devastating. A devil's skull they're about the same size, right? A fox and a devil. The devil's skull is twice the size. Its brain is 3 times smaller. So,
wow.
At risk of saying Australian animals are dumb, the polite way of putting it is that they lack intelligence compared to placentals. But I like to romanticize about that and say, that's because they evolved in an idealistic paradise where you were separated from the rest of the world, and evolutionary processes drove uniqueness rather than intelligence. Hence, koalas in trees, kangaroos in trees, duck-billed platypus, and so on. But the devils were the catalyst for 𝘼𝙪𝙪. Yet 10 years ago, we were devil arc, and we committed to the species because we believed if we could just see the disease through, that it was like a wildfire. It burns hot, it consumes its fuel, but then it slows down, and there are little enclaves left, and that's what's happened. But through the pioneering work of managing a small carnivorous marsupial in big numbers, cost efficiently, keeping them like wild devils, having lots of babies, we figured, hey, we can do this with so many other species. And that was the birth of 𝘼𝙪𝙪 to now, 5,000 hectares of protected land, 15 flagship species projects of devils and quolls and bandicoots and potoroos and bedongs and rock wallabies and frogs. And that doesn't include the species that are ancillary beneficiaries just by us protecting areas and controlling feral pests and fire and disease and feral weeds. But a lot is owed to these beautiful devils, and they happen to be my favorite warm-blooded species.
I absolutely love them. They're so adorable. And I love that you mentioned that back in 2015, that was when everyone was talking about that we might not see devils again. How has the journey been since then? Because you mentioned, you're kind of talking about it, and I think this is a good point to kind of expand a little bit more on the work that 𝘼𝙪𝙪 is doing. What is the day-to-day like for the team there? How are you out there? What is the stuff that you're doing to turn that tide around?
Well, look, Australia's scoreboard for threatening processes and extinction is not good. What's also not good is we've got some of the most researched extinct species on Earth, which means, we didn't act. And so we're really at the forefront of striving to get outcomes, criteria-based outcomes. For example, to prevent extinction. That's an obvious one, right? But we don't want the only place you ever see a devil is at 𝘼𝙪𝙪. They belong in Tasmania as an ecological component that's critical. And so we want to be able to improve the species in situ, in the wild. And that might mean reintroductions to places they've formerly gone extinct and addressing all the threats, bringing a profile and focus to a species, in et cetera, et cetera. Beyond that, there are all of the intrinsic goods of some ecological function in sanctuaries and ancillary species that benefit, community engagement, mass education. But at the end of the day, we want to really be able to impact these species. So for our guys, look, we're not an academic organisation. We have academic partners, but sometimes, you know, things can be, research isn't necessarily conservation unless it's applied research that's, otherwise it's just research. But it so commonly is called conservation. And, you know, even, and the great researchers, don't get me wrong, these academic institutions are critical. Same as rescue rehab. I mean, we saw that through the wildfires, right? A critical role, but it's a welfare issue, not to be confused with conservation. So for us, a day in the life of is working a lot with threatened species projects, i.e. care, husbandry, welfare, reproduction. We spend an incredible amount of time managing our sanctuaries. And some of that is just monitoring the fence lines, you know, through to backburning and or fire and ferals and weeds. Lots of reintroductions, returning species to where they formerly occurred. And really, you know, for me, I feel like we're at the halfway mark, 𝘼𝙪𝙨𝙨. And, you know, at this point, I'd like more results. And I'll explain something to you there. So for Devils, well, we haven't been nearly as needed as we might have been if the Devils did go extinct in 2015. Now, that's an interesting thing because, of course, it's better to have an insurance population and not need it than need it and not have it, right? So we're very proud of that. But with a bunch of other projects, for example, let's say Manning River turtles, one of the oldest turtles in Australia, a freshwater turtle, many threats, pollution, siltation, erosion, habitat destruction. But the one that's the real problem is the feral fox. It's eating nearly 100% of turtle eggs when they lay them in the sand. So turtles come onto the bank, they lay the fox is eating them. But guess the opportunity that presents for us? We can cut the fox out by breeding them and returning babies to the water and head starting them. So that's a different outcome, right? That's an insurance population aims to insure against extinction if worst case unfolds. But you can get other quick wins like that because we can cut the fox out. So, you know, our keepers, our staff, our team, this is what we do, is we work with threatened wildlife. And we strive for those results and outcomes that prevent extinction, provide animals for release, rewilding, and inclusive of into our sanctuaries.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And as a kind of an extra point on that, because you say that, you know, you're viewing 𝘼𝙪𝙨𝙨 as like the halfway point. And I always like to, you know, because you're an optimistic person at heart.
Yeah.
What does you know, a healthy, ecologically diverse Australia look like to you?
Yeah, and it's really challenging, and I'm glad you picked that up there about halfway, because, you know, I feel like we're in the grand final and we're at the halfway mark, but we haven't kicked the winning goal yet, you know, and that doesn't mean that the journey has not been important. It is, but it's difficult. I mean, conservation has a lot of politics. It really does, a lot of emotions, and that can be between organisations, academics, governments, and, you know, really we need a unified Australia that recognises what needs to happen. And I mean, private organisations like 𝘼𝙪𝙨𝙨, I'm a massive fan of Australian Wildlife Conservancy, who's in broad landscape management, just a phenomenal organisation. Private non-government orgs that are really delivering results, you know, and the more we can be helped to get on with the job, the more we can do. And there's a massive skew to that. But, you know, there is bureaucracy and politics, and those things need to be overcome, because at the time that we're consuming energy and resource into that, we're losing our wildlife. So we really need to get on with the job. And for me, you know, a perfect world there is a model that just looks like you've got private organisations like 𝘼𝙪𝙨𝙨 working tirelessly to recognise a species at threat, intervene, triage, build up populations to be able to then, at the same time, bring a mass profile to that species, where you get buy-in from community, land care groups, local government groups, etc., to really be able to impact that species in the wild. But 𝘼𝙪𝙠 has to stop short there because we're not academics. We can educate, we can build a profile, we can provide these species prevention from extinction, but now we need partners, big partners, academics, government, to get them back into the wild, into our national parks or into our private lands. And that's the next step. So the dream's there, and we're so close to it being a reality. And fortunately, 𝘼𝙪𝙠 team, there's a lot of us that are still young in a kind of traditional old person's game. And that's a huge advantage to us because we're here for the long run.
I love it. And I love the positivity and the optimism around achieving that goal. And hopefully we can start to see change like that. And one of the things that you do is obviously you have the reptile park, people come and learn about these animals. There's 𝘼𝙪𝙠, of course. You're hoping people will really take an awareness of our native animals away from, from reading this book. If you want people to be more involved in conservation, they read this book and they say, hey, I want to do something about this. Where's a good place to start? Yeah, look, and that's the $1 million question. It's tricky. I mean, obviously you can financially support conservation organizations. My advice to you is if you do, be certain to find outcomes and results, right? That you're turning your dial, and just really look into that in whatever capacity it is. I think that, and throughout the book, I don't attempt to shame people into doing anything. I don't believe that's the way things work. I think our kids are a little vulnerable in that they're almost shamed for the way that things are now. And, they walk out in the bush and it's don't touch this and don't do, so my greatest encouragement, and it's a separate answer to what can people do tangibly, but my greatest encouragement is get kids out in the bush. Keep them out there. They need to know what's there. They need to start their baseline so that in 20 years they can say, oh, there used to be a forest there, and it's the simplest thing, and it's good for them, right? But get them out in the bush. And I mean, we run a risk where people can think that a cow paddock is the bush. It's not. It's a cow paddock. It's an ecological ghost town. The bush, by definition of nature, national parks, wild, the top end, the West Coast, the far north Queensland, Tasmania, the Red Centre, these places at some point in their life, because I believe that that's the easy win. You get the kids out there, they know what's there, and they grow up to, some of them will want to care and protect it. For people, there's a myriad of ways, and it depends what your interests are. You might be a really welfare associated person and rescue rehab, to be out there with wires, wildlife arc, great. Conservation wise, there are a myriad of local land care groups, conservation organizations that do seek volunteers. The easiest way, and I do not say this as a salesperson, but the easiest way is to financially support organizations to allow them to get on with the job. And really, your trick there is finding the right organizations and finding the right people and doing your homework so that you're contributing to an effective outcome-based. I mean, a lot of the time, look for organizations that are on the tools, delivering the results, not raising for a project to give that funds to someone else, and you can do that cleverly. But I mean, really take an interest, talk to your friends, keep wildlife front row and center, and I guess recognize biodiversity. And it has been now by the UN that biodiversity is a critical stepping stone to our future. And just be aware of it. But I cannot say it more that, get the kids out there and get their hands dirty and let them explore the opportunities that many of us had as kids. Absolutely. It feels like this book feels like a real call to arms, and it feels like a real, encouragement, and that things can be fixed if we come together and we fight the challenges that face us, and it hopefully means that we can save more beautiful animals like those gorgeous little Tassie Devils.
It does. And you know what, somewhat fatalistically, you just have to take my word for it that it's pretty bad out there in the Australian landscape. It's pretty bad. And we've seen the way that people in the world react to something like wildfires, and it's like things have got to get so bad before real change comes. Well, I'm telling you, it's real bad. And so I guess with another dose of optimism is that change is going to come soon, because it can't get much worse. And so there's also a great opportunity for people and kids there, because, scope for employment in these areas should expand as time goes on. From a grassroots level, of being a team member. Sorry, a team member. Thank you. Nearly choked.
Nah, all good.
I'm being a team member at an organisation to being, a conservation engineer, rebuilding a forest, rebuilding an environment, rewilding the species into it. There should be so much potential in areas like that where people can have, make no mistakes, it'll be hard work for everyone and all, but opportunities to do good, real outcome-based good. I think that's exciting for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware that we're running out of time, so I'll kind of finish off
once more. Last one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to. I know that you've got one more guest for us.
I do. And you can see my reliance on having wildlife close. That's when I'm my most comfortable, with these things on my kids. And this little beautiful girl here has a bit of a different story. And this is Lizzie.
Oh, beautiful.
And she's a wombat. And Lizzie's story is such that her mother was hit by a car. And in that context, thankfully, a young family stopped, found her, and she made her way here. And, I mentioned about rescue rehab or people involvement. They're, in a different space to threatened species, but, wonderful rescue rehab organisations, Wires, Wildlife Arc are two that come to mind. And that's what they do for a living. And they don't discriminate between a wombat or a cockroach, they love them all. And so people, especially at this time of year, spring, all our marsupials have little joeys in their pouches. So, safely, if you see a possum or a wombi or a roo or something like that on the side of the road, you can stop and have a little peek, and same goes, it's this time of year when birds will fall out of their nests. It's this time of year where clumsy little reptiles will end up in a cat's mouth. So people can be aware of that. And, Lizzie would have had a very different fate, had a beautiful young family not found her. And her future is such that, they bond with humans especially when she was reared from such a young age. They bond with their carer, and that's a problem when you're trying to release them back into the wild. And, one day it's like, well, you've had all this help and see you later. But there are wonderful partner organisations of the Ark that do just that over a long period of time. And additionally, we have our own sanctuaries that they don't fit all species, but in the case of Lizzie and her kind, that we can, essentially, they're in the wild, but there are extra protective measures of fires managed and ferals are managed. And so, a little bit better for a wombi that right now the world is belly scratches.
Absolutely love it. And that's great that there is so many other options out there for not just for animal rehab, but also to get them back into the wild and get them back into their natural habitat.
Yeah.
As a kind of a last couple of points, I do often, when people ask me the question, what do you want people to take away from your book or whatever, and your response can often be, well, read it and find it out for yourself. I'm actually curious for you, because you've been in this space for so long. What did writing the book teach you anything about conservation that you might not have known beforehand?
Look, it reiterated how incredibly unique our Aussie wildlife is, no doubt about that. It really continued to inspire me about the need for people to be aware of what's at stake. It reiterated to me that, our organisation, we feel, we've got a bit of a nuanced approach. We're in the threatened species space. We've got a few sanctuaries, but we're not looking to acquire. We're really there for those species. And so through writing the book, it actually helped define or redefine, our purpose, our vision, our mission, because, we're there for Australia's threatened species. And a lot of that means saying no to the good to focus on the great. And the great is those projects and being results based on those projects. And so that I found really insightful. Outside of conservation, the one thing that really rammed home for me in the book was how important good people are in your life. And I talk about this in some capacities, but, the dozen incredible mentors I've had in my life shaped it, and I am their product and hopefully legacy. And, without those people, I don't think I'd be the same person I am. And, for kids or anyone, you've got to be able to latch onto those people and take their wisdom, take their knowledge, and take their experience and life skills. And that was just so reflective through writing the book, because these people just keep coming up,
Oh, I love it. And it's so great that seeing that inspiration for you, it comes out on the page, and you should be really proud of this book.
Thank you. And I mean, same as I say about the refining and focusing of 𝘼𝙪𝙪 is that, we're not an organization that campaigns. And we could, but that's not what we do, because it would detract from our threatened species initiatives. And we're not we're focused in New South Wales, which has an incredible diverse array of wildlife. And that's cool, because we can do it properly and we can really have those results and not be spread too thin. And so, it was really nice writing that and half understanding it as it is at the same time.
Love it. We'll finish off with a couple of questions. And first of all, this is more one from me, because I know in terms of upcoming events that you've got going on, you'll be taking part in 𝘼𝙪𝙨𝙨𝙞. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I sure can. I mean, have a look at my socks.
Oh,
I'm wearing them today. And most of us are. And these particular ones have little turtles on them, but they're just a nice, easy initiative for us to raise some funds for wildlife and for people to get a good Christmas present for their friends. And so there's turtles and quolls and so on, and they're colourful and, a great little present for Christmas. So I'd encourage you in any way, shape or form that you can support organisations like the 𝘼𝙪𝙨 to do so. If it's as easy as buying a colourful pair of socks for your friend or family, I mean, that's why we try and make it simple. And 𝘼𝙪𝙪𝙪, lovely name.
Oh, I absolutely love it. And I love that design that they've come up with for the turtles there. It's fantastic. Will we see any new books or any other endeavors coming up? Will we see another book from you?
Look, I'd really like to do I've had a great life too, a fun life. I love our country and I've spent a heck of a lot of time in it and around it, and there's plenty of adventure and mishap and good old tales, and stories. I think in a little while I'd consider another book, but I want to put a bit more meat in the sandwich. As I said to you, I feel like we're at the halfway mark. I'd love to write once we hit full time and have scored the goals, but there's only one of me and there's only one of each of our team. And in that regard, we're now heading into a great delivery phase. And that is, we've built our organisation up. We're at the halfway mark, and now we're enabled to get on with the job. And that will consume my focus and my team's focus for at least the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. And as a final point, because I'm aware that we're pretty much out of time, if any of our listeners or viewers want to check out the work that 𝘼𝙪𝙪𝙪 and the Australian Reptile Park are doing, where can they go?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, first and foremost, I'd be foolish not to say, read the book. It's a whole backstory. And, I'd plead with you too. I'm an Aussie kid from Western Sydney. I've had a great life. I've worked my butt off and I've put it into a book that everyone should be able to understand, an enjoyable book that doesn't shame anyone, but teaches us about Australia. And I think that's, a really cheat sheet. But, I mean, you've got the Australian Reptile Park, and we love to say we're on every family bucket list. We've been around for 70 years and, we're a family fun day out. So come here if you can. 𝘼𝙪𝙪𝙪 has very limited visitation opportunities, but we do. We're not a tourism organisation, but we do, and you can get up there and have a look. So I'd encourage people to do that. Otherwise, there's a bunch of stuff online that people can look into. I mean, when we went through COVID, Caitlin, how many videos did we make?
Over 100.
We made over 100 videos. How many would I have been in? 50?
Oh, yeah, maybe a half.
I was probably in 50. And most of them, look, what we were doing was teaching kids, so they're not the most but there's so much good content there. And then there are a whole series around ferals and fires and the state of Australia and little bits and pieces. I mean, you can jump in and have a look at that, but the book's your ultimate cheat sheet to get upskilled. And if you have the chance, visit 𝘼𝙪𝙪𝙪 or Reptile Park, and, equally as much as that, if you break Australia down to a few key areas and you have the chance, pick off whichever's closest to home, but from Tassie and the Red Centre and the Eastern Ranges and tropical North Queensland and the top end and Kimberley and, you know, the West Coast and the beautiful Southwest, and, you know, make them your bucket list. Start hitting those areas and just see the things that you may not have already. And if you're already doing it, keep doing it.
I love it. I love it. I could honestly talk to you all day and hear about your passion for Australian wildlife. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So I'm just going to say thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, Tim, and seeing all of your lovely furry guests as well. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, you know, that's funny timing because I've had Lizzie's bed next to me the whole time. And without me doing it, she just jumped in it, you know, so tired. She had a bottle before we started, and so she's played a bit. But no, look, thank you. And thank you to Booktopia. And I mean, you guys are out there, you know, as a book retailer, but you're giving voice to Aussie animals and kids like me. And, you know, I can't thank you enough for that.
It's an absolute pleasure, mate, and we're so glad that we can support your book and help spread this message out there. For everyone listening, signed copies of Aussie Ark are still available, and you can head over to booktopia.com.au where you can grab a copy for yourself, only for a limited time only. So get them while they last. Tim, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today.
Thank you. All the very best.